Good morning. Today's Learning to Earn channel, we'd like to show you a little bit about a diesel engine. So if you've never seen the inside of one or kind of what it costs to actually repair one, this is our opportunity. So today we're looking at a Mitsubishi 3-cylinder engine. And so right over here, we can look at the block. This is the size of this engine. It's not very big. Three-cylinder Yanmar diesel. No, it's a 3-cylinder Mitsubishi diesel. And on the table are the parts for it. So this engine has got a lot of hours on it. It's got close to 4,000 hours on it, and can't say that all of its life has been the best. It's been neglected in some ways. So we have taken the engine apart. The compression on it was low, and we were having troubles getting it to start. So we went ahead and took it apart, and these are the pieces. So I want to show you some of the internal parts and what it would cost or what it would take to actually repair this. So looking at our crankshaft, you can see it looks pretty nice. Our surfaces are pretty shiny. When we take a micrometer and we mic it, everything is testing out really well. So our crank looks brand new, but it's not brand new. So our bearings, we pulled our bearings off and we're looking at our bearings. Our bearing surfaces don't look too bad. What we're looking for when we look at a bearing is what kind of debris is embedded in it. And so you can see here, there is some debris that's embedded in it. Doesn't look terrible, but there is some debris in it. To give an example of one that doesn't look quite so good, here's one where there is a chunk missing. So a big piece of the bearing is actually broke away. There's a little bit of a crack going on here. So a pretty good sized chunk of debris is wedged in there, and then it is broke free later on. The top side of that same bearing also has some spots in it where items have been embedded in there and kind of stuck. So those are signs that the material that's on here is a lead babbitt. And the babbitt is a soft material. Its purpose is so that when heavy pieces of metal or sand or dirt or any kind of carbon, instead of scoring or scratching our crankshaft, the idea is that material will embed into this and actually absorb and then not tear. So it's doing its job by having these spots where some debris embedded rather than tearing its way through. So those are some things that we're looking at to see what kind of condition is this engine. And overall, our bearings look pretty good. So that looks nice. Our pistons, we pulled our pistons out, and this is where our problems really lie. So you can turn this around, and we look. This bottom of this ring land groove is full of carbon. So the bottom, and if I roll it around, you'll see all of a sudden it stops. There is a bunch of carbon in there, and that carbon is taking up a lot of space. So my ring is not traveling up and down. It's virtually stuck in place. It can move up and down, but it cannot move in and out. So as that piston is flexing in and out, we lose that flexibility. That's going to affect our ability to seal, and it's going to affect our compression, which is something that we measured when we were testing it. The other thing that I want to point out is there's a groove here. So we got this land area that matches up with our carbon, and because the carbon was in there and this ring was stuck, the ring was actually moving up and down, which is a bad thing, and it's actually wearing into the piston, and this groove is wear in the piston. And we measured this. It's about a 30 thousandths groove. It's a very deep groove. If we were to try and buy a new set of rings and put it in here, then the new rings would get caught on the groove and try to bend over the groove, and it would affect it. So we need to replace the pistons in order to fix this thing correctly. We can't just grind the groove away and allow the new ring to go in there, because the ring will move up and down. So this one has about an 8 thousandths tolerance of movement up and down, and right now, even with new rings, we're going to probably have 30 thousandths movement up and down. So it's pretty excessive. So the only real solution to fixing this one is to replace the piston. The rings themselves are really wore out, so we can look at it. It's hard to see probably in this film, but the inside of this groove, this ring, is actually much thinner than the outside. And that's due to the fact that it was actually working in this groove, and it should actually be square. So it was working in the groove, and it actually wore the inside more than the outside. This is our oil control ring. So there are holes in the oil control ring, and the idea is this piston's traveling up and down. This is going to wipe the oil, excess oil, off the cylinder walls. The oil should go inside of these grooves, inside of these holes, and then travel on the inside of the piston and actually cools the inside of the piston. And as you hopefully can see in this film, this groove, these holes are full of carbon. And so because they're filled with carbon, the oil, instead of wiping off and going through the holes into the inside of the piston, they're not. They may be wiping it off, or it may not be going there at all. So that's affecting the inside of my piston. And when I look at the inside of my piston, the inside of the piston has a lot of black in there, so this piston has been overheating. The way that I cool the inside of a piston is through the oil running through the oil control ring, runs through the holes, runs down the inside of the piston, and carries the heat of the piston away. If I plug those holes, which we did with carbon, then I lose that cooling ability, my pistons overheat, and it damages the piston. So this particular one has a lot of heat damage on the inside. If I go back to this one you can see it's got huge, very, very heavy black deposits. It's been hot, and this wrist pin has actually got some blackness on it. It's actually pretty bad. So we have a pretty bad piston here. So you can see here how the carbon is building up. It's actually starting to build up on the piston, and that is also building up in our rings. Of the 3 piston, 2 of them had rings that were kind of stuck in the groove, which is going to affect compression. So all those are bad situations. So overall, the rest of the engine is in pretty good shape. The pistons and the rings are in really bad shape. The cylinder itself has very little wear on it, and so there's nothing wrong with the block. We'll be able to clean it up, and we'll be able to just replace it. So with that in mind, you think, well, that sounds like a cheap experience. Let's just repair it. So I went, this came out of a Toro mower, so we went ahead and contacted Toro. We got some prices on it, and the price on this piston right here, a piston and pin set, which is the piston and the wrist pin, no rings, just the piston and the pins for this particular situation, is $230 per piston. So to replace the 3 pistons will cost us $691.32 just for the pistons and the wrist pin. That doesn't come with rings. If you want to replace the rings, which of course you do, the ring sets, each ring set, which is a set of 3 rings, each ring set is $178.42. 3 sets of rings is $535.26. So we have over $1,100 to buy 3 pistons, wrist pin, 3 sets of rings. That doesn't include anything else that we need for the mower. So we went ahead and priced. We want to know if I'm going to rebuild this and change this, we would also replace all the gaskets, and we would want to replace all of our bearings. Even though our bearings are pretty decent shape, we would want to replace them because we're there. And if you're going to rebuild an engine, you're going to put the money into pistons and rings, you want to bring all your tolerances as close to new as possible. And so replacing bearings and all the seals will cost $1,886. So this price list that I have is bearings, gaskets, pistons, including the wrist pin, and rings for $1,800. So it gives you an idea. Some engines, some diesel engines, are very, very expensive to replace, and we're not really rebuilding and not changing a lot of components. All we're doing is changing one component really for that price. If our fuel pump was wore and we needed to replace that, that's another $1,000. If we had to replace any other pieces on it, that would all be on top of that. So you can see how fast diesel engines can get expensive and how it adds up. This particular engine, the air cleaner was left loose several times and it sucked dirt through the air filter. And so you can see how simple maintenance problem can get very expensive very quick. So in this case, the cost of repairing this engine is cost prohibitive for the actual mower that it's going into. It's an older mower. What we can get out of it with a good working engine is about $1,500. It's cost us $1,800 just to get the engine hopefully into a running condition. And so in this case, the engine needs to be disposed of and the machine just needs to be sent to scrap iron. We'll make more money on scrap iron than we would actually repairing this machine. So it's cost prohibitive to fix it going to the original manufacturer. That being said, we did some research and we found a company in China that makes aftermarket parts. And there is an aftermarket kit that includes pistons, rings, and gaskets. Don't replace the bearings, just those 3 items. And that cost would be $1,000. So if I was trying to do minimum and get it as cheap as possible, I could go aftermarket and I could buy and replace that and get $1,000. I can get the same or similar parts and pieces. But now I'm getting aftermarket quality, which is maybe not the same quality as it would be if it was an OEM Mitsubishi product. So you have to weigh, how long do we want it to last? Is the machine still worth $1,000? What are you going to do? So that just kind of gives you a brief idea of what machines cost, how it costs to repair, and how expensive a improperly installed air cleaner, not changing your oil on time, putting the wrong cooling system or letting it overheat, how quickly it can get an expensive situation. So this is a Mitsubishi. So now we're going to go to another project and we're going to swing over and look at a new engine. This is the same size, very similar size engine as to the one that's over here. This one's a Yanmar engine, and we can see is our block. So you can see how big the cylinders are. So our piston's not very big. Pistons fit in there. So this particular engine was a student project in the past, so it was a brand new engine that's been apart by students. And so taking this one apart, we have an idea what new looks like, or what a good working diesel engine should look like. So you can see here is our piston. Piston doesn't have a lot of wear, so we have some minor vertical scratches. Our rings have very little movement up and down. Our grooves in here don't have a lot of carbon buildup. We don't have a lot of carbon on the top of the piston. Our cylinders, I can't catch my fingernail on it, so I'm looking for wear in there. And this one has very little wear, almost virtually no wear. When I come and I try to do a close-up of the bearings themselves, this gives you an idea of what new bearings kind of look like. So with just a short amount of time on it, this thing may have like an hour or something, you can see that there are some shiny on there, but the gray, the like aluminum color gray, is what these would look like when they're brand new. Most of this damage that we're seeing in here is probably from starting it up. And so the most damage on an engine takes place during startup. There's not lubrication, there's no oil flowing. The crankshaft is sitting against the bearings. When I first crank it over the first couple of revolutions, it's metal to metal, and there is very little lubrication. Most damage takes place during startup in a diesel engine that is properly maintained. I never turn that radio on. So that gives you an idea of what new stuff would look like. So all of our wear, all of our bushings, our idler gear, everything on it looks really nice. We got a camshaft here. When we measured the lobe, there was no wear on the lobes. Everything looks shiny and clean because he's already washed it. We don't really want to store camshafts down like this as a rule of thumb, because when you store things like this, the weight of it can actually cause it to distort. So crankshafts and camshafts should always be stored in the upright position. We don't want to knock it over like we did our little headphone thing over there. And so typically we will stand it up on the table leg and tape it or somehow secure it to a table leg so it stands vertical. So we will want to do the same thing with a crankshaft. Crankshafts, we want to be storing it in the vertical position. So we don't want to lay them on the table.
Or if you do have it like that on the table, because I know in the book it shows that they have blocks under each section to support it.
You can actually support it. So we just don't want to lay it out flat like that, because that's a bad thing. So we'll move around. We'll look at a third machine here. So this machine is a fairway mower. It's got a Mitsubishi engine in it. The story on this one is they were using it in the fall, and then we started having a head gasket problem. And we were getting cooling exhaust gases in the cooling system. So we went ahead and pulled the head on this particular machine. And I want to show you where that failure took place. So looking closely at our head gasket, you can see right here there's some dark areas, and if you look you can see some kind of erosion that took place. So this is the point of failure on this particular engine. There's a bolt here that holds the head on and a bolt over here. So between the bolts, the head may have warped a little bit. The bolts may have come loose. They should be retorquing those bolts periodically. And there's a schedule that you should be doing that on. And so this particular one, they got enough looseness here that it started to leak from the compression side into the cooling jacket. And that ended up coming up into the radiator and ended up in our overflow tube. When we look carefully over here, you can see kind of a rusty looking color. There's an indication that this was starting to weep a little bit, and had this one not failed, this would probably be the next point at which it would fail. And it would fail from here into an oil jacket or into a cooling system. So you can see over here, same thing. We got some darkness going on where this thing was starting to leak. And we're hoping that with this machine, that just replacing the head gasket will allow us to get it back running. So taking the head gasket off, we'll turn it over here. You can see on the back side there's some material missing, and it's missing right in here. So pretty good indication that that's where our problem is and where this thing started to leak. So we'll be cleaning it up. We don't want a bunch of trash in here, so we'll put paper towels in here to kind of keep it. We'll be scraping this off. We're going to have to flush out our cooling system so we can kind of plug these holes and then try to scrape them off. But the difficulty is, how do you clean all that off without it getting down into camshaft, lifters, and our cooling system and in our oil jackets. So we'll look at one more engine. So I'll keep talking here. So this last engine is a Yanmar diesel engine. It's similar to the one that we just looked at. The difference is going to be, this is a used engine. And this particular used engine had a hole in the air filter housing, and it sucked dirt in that housing. Just like the first engine that we looked at, this one has a ring groove right where the top of the piston is. It's starting to wear. The piston rings were moving up and down, wearing into the piston. There's a groove up there that if we were to buy new rings and stick it on there, the bottom of the ring will actually catch on that groove and will interfere with how it works. So that might not be such a good thing. So we need to figure that out. We also have a lot of wear on each corner over here. Not so much on that piston, but we'll see it more on this one where it's on more than one side. Over on this side. So we have wear. We have the wrist pins. So we take them off. I can actually feel the wear just by running my hand on it. So the wrist pin is actually physically moving up and down the piston and damaging the piston. So this one needs to have rings and pistons. And we priced it. So to get rings, pistons, gasket kits, all the bearings, for this particular machine, it's going to cost us $827 to get all that. So each one of these pistons is $127, and the rings are like $67 for a set of rings. So much lower cost to rebuild this engine, which is the same size, same horsepower as the Mitsubishi. The difference is a different brand. And a different brand is how many they made. So they made a lot more Yanmars than they made Mitsubishi engines. So
Can the year of the engine also affect the price of the?
it can affect it. So cost effectiveness, this machine we're going to rebuild. Okay? And that just gives us a quick idea of some of the things that we're going to be looking at and what it costs to rebuild some diesel engines.